So before we explore this angular.json file, let's see which Angular CLI commands we can use inside of our project. We used ng-new outside of it. Now we can basically use all remaining commands inside of it. Now you can type ng-help here, not ng-help, but just ng-help to learn about all the commands. And of course, as mentioned, you have that page in the official documentation. There under CLI commands, you also see all the commands. Now, some commands are really niche commands which you'll rarely need, but of course there are also some commands which you'll need all the time. For example, ng-serve. You know this one. It serves your application. Now, just as before, if you add --help thereafter, you get details about this command. And you can see there are quite some flags you can set. Now, not all these flags are required, of course. The defaults work just fine. But for example, you can set a port flag here to use a different port than the default of 4200. You can add --prod to actually serve your app in production mode to have kind of an idea of how it will work once you do build it for production. This, however, is not something you can use on a real web server. It's not production ready. It's just a preview of how production mode will work. You also have --open. This will actually tell the CLI to not only serve the app, but to open the app in a new browser tab once it's done serving it up, so that you don't have to manually open it there. And so on. There are a bunch of configuration options you can set there. Again, most of them are rarely needed, but if you do need them, well, here they are. As mentioned, over time they might change, but still, this command and the official docs here are a great place to learn more about them. Now, besides ng-serve, we also got ng-generate. And ng-generate, with --help, allows us to generate things in our application. Here are the things we can generate. You saw a couple of them throughout the course, like components, directives, but you could also generate guards or services. You could generate pipes or modules, interfaces and intersetters for the HTTP client, an application, which is something I'll come back to, and some niche things like a service worker or a web worker. You also see additional flags here, but to see all the available flags, you should be a bit more specific and, for example, say ng-generate component --help to see how you can configure the generation of a component. And there you see that there are, again, a bunch of configuration options. Now, this might, by the way, be overwhelming by now, but keep in mind that you don't have to learn those by heart. The defaults will work just fine in most situations. Just when you find that a default doesn't work for you, you might want to look into these configuration flags here and see whether you can change the defaults to give you the component or whatever you're trying to generate in the way you want it. For example, to not use inline styles, to not use inline templates, to change the default prefix which is added, to not generate test files, and so on. And of course, this does not just exist for the component generation, but for pipes and so on. So ng-generate, of course, is an important command. ng-lint uses this tslint file I mentioned before. It will now basically go through your entire setup and tell you if you have any linting errors. And here everything passed, but for example, if I go to the app component here, and I do remove this prefix app root, and I would lint again, it should tell me about this. So let's wait for this to finish. And indeed, it found a lint error, and now it tells you that in the app component file, in line 4 here, the selector should be kebab case and include a dash. So it tells me that I'm not following this recommended practice of naming my components like this. So that's linting, and you can always use this lint command from time to time to check your code quality. ng-build, of course, is also an important command to build your project. With --prod, you build it for production, so you optimize it as much as possible. And you also saw before in this course, in the deployment section, that this will generate a dist folder where you find your generated project files, which you then can put onto a server to, well, serve your application from there and to really serve your application to all the users out there in the world. So here is this dist folder. Now I will come back to deployment a little bit later. You learned how you can deploy it, but actually there also is a different way of deploying with help of the CLI, and as mentioned, I will come back to that. For now, let's ignore it. So these are the CLI commands, and again, I pointed at it before, but check out the official docs to learn about all the commands and all the configuration options. There are some commands like ng-update and ng-add and ng-deploy, at which we'll have a closer look in this module though. Before we do that, let's analyze the Angular JSON file though, because that configures our project in the end, and thus far we didn't have a closer look yet.